Hi, I'm Jillian Lombardi, and this is my New York Times project. I'd like to quickly summarize the article that I read that was published in February. At the time, what they had written was after a decade of construction, Ethiopia's Project GERD, the Grand Renaissance Dam, is expected to begin being filled in July, and that tensions between Ethiopia and Egypt have increased as both Egypt's water supply and Ethiopia's economic future are at stake. The piece briefly covers a myriad of relevant issues, including the domestic politics and history between the two countries, the behavior of their leaders, negotiations involving other international actors, and the different elements that impact the Nile's water, including pollution, climate change, and population growth. First and foremost, already, I'd like to begin my analysis of this conflict from a realist perspective. Key assumptions of this school of thought are that the international system is anarchic, and thus actors will resort to self-help and working in their best interests, as seen through the Waltz quote. This article highlights that the realist instincts of the country. Ethiopia needs to defend its access to water, as the article emphasizes how dependent Egyptians are on the Nile. However, Ethiopia's future economic growth and access to sufficient power is totally reliant on the completion of GERD. So, is war a potential outcome? Well, according to Faron in his bargaining theory of war, rational states should have incentives to locate negotiated settlements that all would prefer to the gamble of war. The Times explains that for many years these countries have been trying to negotiate and still are. However, the article also says that there are murmurs of war. Why would this be the case? Well, one of Faron's 3 reasons that make countries unable to avoid war is issue indivisibility. Territory, like a massive river and its water, is difficult to divide. This may mean war for the two countries. Ultimately, this is a collective action problem. The Nile's water is a collective good. GERD threatens 2 key features important to collective goods. With the dam, water supply potentially becomes rival and excludable, as Ethiopia's use of water could easily reduce Egypt's supply. Ethiopia is virtually trying to defect from this prisoner's dilemma. Schellings explains that cooperation becomes more likely with iteration. Well, the fact that the article tells us that Ethiopia has already tried to defect and build a dam in the 1970s helps explain why tensions are so high. However, I must add that Ethiopia has the defense that GERD will not impact Egypt's water supply. Coming from a different angle, they also say that climate change threatens Egypt's supply, so storing water upstream in their country will help everyone. The article also includes that Egyptians abuse the Nile as much as they revere it, hinting that Egypt has some blame in damaging this collective good and decreasing their water supply. Alrighty, another school of thought could explain why tensions are so high. I turn to constructivist Wendt, who claims that actors' identities matter and countries will act differently towards other countries based on their opinions and beliefs about those other actors. This article emphasizes how important the Nile is to both of these countries. Egypt and Ethiopia have a history of rivalry, specifically with their claims to the Nile. Egypt tried to invade Ethiopia in the 1870s, and this was brought up in recent negotiations. Egypt's justification for its dominance over the Nile are these treaties that Ethiopia refuses to recognize. And as I've mentioned before, Ethiopia tried to build dams and was met with threats and outrage from Egypt. All right. Also, liberals would want to consider regime type and domestic politics. Liberal theories of war express that democracies tend to be more pacific, so it's important to note that neither of these regimes are democratic, which could lead to a higher chance of war. From the domestic level, liberals explain that individual citizens matter in IR, and both leaders may use this international issue over territory as a nationalist way to gain support. The president of Egypt is sensitive about being weak. He also may be scapegoating Ethiopia for water scarcity due to pollution and climate change that have nothing to do with GERD. Similarly, Ethiopia's prime minister faces an election this year and has to consider his people, his nation's people, who invested in the dam. Issues that arise with nationalism include war as a result of conflict over territory, like a river. And sometimes these leaders get trapped in swaggering and need to follow through. This leads me to uses of force. As tensions rise, both Egypt and Ethiopia have relied on swaggering and extreme threats. The Ethiopian prime minister has threatened millions are ready to fight. Egypt has bought weapons for South Sudan and allegedly supported civil protests in Ethiopia and even threatened bombing. All right, many international organizations and other powers like the World Bank, America, and the UN have gotten involved, especially in late 2019. International organizations like the UN are widely accepted as a standard measure of actors' legitimacy, and constructivists would even classify these organizations as their own separate actors to emphasize their influence. Neoliberal institutionalists would also say that these international organizations help resolve collective action problems. So, Annan explains that the UN was founded on a universal declaration of human rights. So, as the article shows, they're tracking the water supply in Egypt to see if they need to intervene and try and prevent death and strife in that country. Another purpose of the UN is to supply an epistemic function. And in this case, that involves hydrologists. Despite the future of GERD, the UN expects a shortage by 2020 due to Egypt's rapid population growth and the global climate crisis. All right. So, this climate over GERD between Egypt and Ethiopia in this article illuminates their realist self-help motives, their long history as rivals, and how their domestic politics impact their leaders' behaviors. It is important to note that a new New York Times article was released in July, and it confirms, as expected, that the demand has begun to be filled and the situation's more tense. Even if it doesn't matter if the dam is filled quickly or not. By this rate, the area is facing a shortage of water very shortly. So I believe that because of the scarcity of water, conflict will worsen, and Ethiopia might have to change its priorities and shift away from power, but to water as a resource for its people. All right. Thank you so much.